The bang at the door pulled Chris from his nap. He rolled in bed for a moment, wondering what was happening. The noise intensified, and he limped out of bed. His dog Annie wagged her tail as she followed him to the front door. Outside were cops. He recognized one of them as Sheriff Nolan and the other as his deputy, Darrell. They had their eyes on him ever since he returned to town. "Put your hands where we can see them, Chris," Sheriff Nolan barked. "What's going on?" Chris asked, confused. "Do as he says," Darrell said, pointing his gun at him. Chris lifted his hands, and as he did, the deputy pushed him against the wall. He struggled, and a gun was placed against his back. The sheriff went into the building with another officer right behind him. Chris noticed the crowd that was slowly beginning to form. His neighbors across the street were watching the debacle with their phones out, his head lowered in embarrassment. He had done nothing wrong. He didn't even know what was happening to warrant the cops coming over to his house and treating him this way. He heard noise from within the house as the cops ransacked his home. Annie barked and they yelled at her to shut up. Poor Annie. She was a dog he rescued, whose former owner had been violent. She had to be very scared. The officers returned. The sheriff held up a bagged pistol that made the crowd gasp. "You're under arrest, Chris Jacobs, for the robbery and assault of Scott Brown," the sheriff said, just as the cold cuffs clamped around his wrists. Chris struggled, voicing his innocence as he was taken to the police cruiser. Cameras flashed in his face, and he was shoved into the back seat of the car, his head lowered, and he burst into tears. He had done nothing wrong, but why would they believe him? The town of Burke had a pretty decent-sized police station. It used to be smaller, but as the population grew, so did the crime rate and expansion. However, budget cuts affected the maintenance of the building, and Chris sat in a freezing dark interrogation room. He had been left here for more than 3 hours, going by the wristwatch. He had called out several times, but no one answered him. This was not fair, but nothing had been suitable since he got out of prison. The world treated him like a vermin because of a mistake he made 10 years ago. He had returned home to Burke. Another mistake he had made, and the people made it obvious they didn't want him around. They crossed to the other side of the road when they saw him. They walked past him with their noses lifted and hands clutching their bags. They grabbed their children like he ate kids for breakfast whenever little kids strayed to him with curiosity. The first week he had moved back, there had been some sort of petition to get him kicked out of Burke, but the council votes had failed, and he was considered free to remain in Burke as long as he was of good behavior. Yet he had been treated as a threat for 3 months since he returned. The people he once considered friends treated him like they didn't know him, cutting ties with him. The door opened with a creak. The sheriff had with him a half-eaten donut which he munched hungrily. "I need a lawyer," Chris said, the first thing that came to mind. A lawyer hadn't saved him 10 years ago from going to prison, but still, he needed one. "You are scum," the sheriff spat with hate. "Piece of shit. You're going back to prison, and you ain't coming back from it." He was enjoying this. The sheriff had always hated Chris, and with good reason. "You should never have come back here," the sheriff said. There was a sound at the door. The deputy joined in, who gulped down a bottle of soda. "You confess yet, boss?" Darrell asked. "I did not—" "Shut up!" The sheriff hit the table, making Chris jump. "You robbed old Mr. Brown, who has always been kind to everyone in town." The sheriff was right. Mr. Brown was one of the few who didn't treat Chris like he was the Antichrist. The man even gave him a job mowing his lawn and invited him for dinner. Chris shook his head in denial, afraid of what the sheriff would do if he said a word. "You went to his house with the pistol, hit him on the head, and stole all his savings. I always knew you were an asshole, but to go this low, you are a monster, a disgrace." Tears pooled in Chris's eyes at the words. How many times had he heard those words from people? From his mother when she had come to him for the first time, and the last time when he was in prison. From his then-fiancée, who had told him she could not wait for him and needed to move on with her life. "I didn't do anything," Chris said. He would never hurt Mr. Brown. Never. He had never deliberately hurt anyone. "Then explain what the pistol was doing in your house," Darrell asked. The sheriff shot him a look, and he kept quiet. "It belonged to my father," Chris simply explained. He had done some spring cleaning a couple months ago and found it. He should have listened to his intuition and gotten rid of it. but he had kept it for sentimental reasons. "You're drunk of a father." "Like father, like son," the sheriff laughed. His dead father had been one of Burke's most minor favorite citizens. He had been a drunk and couldn't hold on to a job for more than a month. As a young boy, Chris had promised himself that he would not end up like his father. Unfortunately, he had beaten his father's record of not going to prison. "I am—" Chris yelped in pain as the sheriff grabbed him by the neck. He was a burly man who used to be a boxer. His eyes boggled as the sheriff's hold on him intensified. "Your life is over as you know it. You are not coming back from this." "Boss, I think he's dying." Darrell's voice drifted to him. The sheriff let go of Chris, who gasped frantically for air. He had felt at that moment that he was dying, and he had been ready to give up. The life he was living was no life. It was one filled with regrets and torment, one he was tired of. "I would like to speak to my client." They turned around at a voice. For the first time, Chris was relieved. His cousin, Ashley, was a lawyer and lived in Burke. "Your cousin is not getting away with this like last time," the sheriff sneered. "You have no evidence against him, do you?" Ashley asked. "He was seen leaving Mr. Brown's house last night," the sheriff said. "I had dinner with him," Chris defended. "After which you knocked him over and stole from him," the sheriff said. "Mr. Brown is in the operating room. When he comes out, he will tell us the truth. Until then, you can't keep him," Ashley said. The sheriff glared at both of them with hatred. He had hated them since that fateful night that a drunk Chris had been the one driving in an accident that had taken the life of his only brother. An accident that had made Chris go away to prison for manslaughter, but got out on good behavior a couple months ago. They rode back home quietly. Chris was heavy with thoughts and worry for Mr. Brown. He hoped he was going to recover from the attack. He was a kind man who didn't deserve to be attacked and stolen from. "Did you do it?" his cousin asked when they arrived at the house. His head lowered in disappointment. Of all people, she would know him better. Most of his family had given up on him. He would be out on the streets if he had inherited the house from his mother. "No, I did not," Chris said. She didn't believe him. He could tell the way she looked at him. "Don't leave town and stay at home. All eyes are on you right now," Ashley said. Annie ran to him when he opened the door. He hugged her. She was his only friend and probably the only one who believed in him. The house was a mess. It seemed like a storm had passed through. They must have returned and continued looking for something to implicate him. He moved past the chaos and set up a place to rest his head. He closed his eyes but was unable to sleep. Sleep was far away from him. He had a feeling his situation was going to get worse. He was right. The following morning, Chris was rearrested on charges of murder. Mr. Brown had died overnight, and a neighbor had given a statement that she saw him leave after a scream came from the house. He had been kept in the interrogation room for more than half a day without food or drink. He had asked for his lawyer, but the sheriff ignored him, taking his fingerprints and making snide remarks about him. The sheriff came in. He was pretty happy to see him go down. He had never forgiven him for being the driver in that car 10 years ago. Driving drunk was the worst mistake of Chris's life. He had been young and stupid, ending with him losing his best friend and spending years in prison. He had paid his dues, but to everyone else, he was still the monster who had cut short the life of Burke's sweetheart and the mayor's son. "Karma's a bitch. It's over for you, Chris. I am so glad I am alive to see you fall. They are going to give you the electric chair. I will make sure of it," the sheriff sneered. "Please, Nolan, believe me, I didn't do—" Chris groaned in pain as he saw stars, with the sheriff's fists running into him. He doubled over as another punch hit him in the stomach. Soon he was on his knees as blows rammed into him, filled with anger and hate for him. "Your life is over. Fucking over," the sheriff said. "Sheriff, you're going to kill him," Darrell said, pulling him off Chris. "He deserves to die. He's nothing but trouble," the sheriff spat as Chris reeled in pain. "He didn't do it, Sheriff," Darrell said. "He fucking did it. We got a confession. Tom and Blake's picked up a guy hitching out of town. He got blood over him and some of Mr. Brown's jewelry. He was high on drugs and confessed to killing him. He's got a history, Sheriff. He's the one, not Chris," Darrell said excitedly. The sheriff pulled away from Chris, staring at him in surprise and then disappointment. "I told you I didn't do it," Chris whispered as a cloak of relief descended upon him. With all fingers pointed at him and a criminal record, it would have been easy for him to be sentenced for a crime he didn't commit. As he headed out of the building a couple of minutes later, wincing from the bruises, he decided he would no longer be a coward and allow people to treat him with disdain and disrespect. He had gotten a new opportunity in life, and he was going to grab it by the reins and make the most of life.
This was the second time little Hope had been betrayed, tossed aside, and unwanted. It was her own mother the first time it happened. What could a newborn baby do that was so wrong? Why was a healthy baby girl in an orphanage? Miss Ruth was the nanny of the orphanage, and even she could not justify what Hope's mother had done. Although Hope never experienced true parental love, she continued to hope that everything would get better in her life. Like everyone else in the orphanage, she dreamed that someday she would be loved and adopted into a nice family. She imagined herself as someone's daughter, at first subconsciously, and then her imagination became increasingly vivid. Throughout the years, other children were adopted from the orphanage, but no one wanted to make Hope part of their family. With each visit of potential parents, her dream of being adopted faded. After all, babies are more likely to be adopted, and she is already 10 years old. One day, there was a family who wanted to adopt Hope. She could not contain her joy. She thought, finally, she will be loved. However, it turned out that life outside the orphanage was not at all what Hope imagined it would be. She felt like an outsider in the world of her foster mother and her husband. Hope was treated like a piece of furniture, deprived of human care and love. The girl tried her best to be good, obedient, the way she needed to be. But her foster parents never responded how she wanted. Hope was ready to continue living with them, just to be part of the family, but her foster parents decided against keeping her. A year later, they decided they no longer needed Hope, and now the 11-year-old orphan was cast aside once again. Hope returned to the orphanage, unwanted and unloved. She began to wonder, will she be able to recover the deep betrayal she has experienced in life? Will she believe in the goodness of people again? Will she experience love? Hope looked out the window as her foster mother left, and big tears streamed down her face. Wiping them with her small palm, she did not understand why she had been abandoned twice already in her short life. Her own mother, who was supposed to love her, had betrayed her the first time. This time, when it seemed to Hope that life was improving, she thought she was going to have a real family. Hope's now former foster mother disappeared around the corner without even looking back, even once. Hope watched her leave, and with a sinking heart, she hoped that her foster mother would change her mind. "Don't worry, it's a part of life," said a familiar voice behind her. It was Mike, Hope's best friend. Mike was 3 years older than Hope, and, just like her, got into an orphanage in very early childhood, but there was a significant difference in his story, as Hope herself believed. His parents died, so he ended up in the orphanage. Clinging to Mike, Hope gave in to her emotions and cried as hard as she could. Mike ran his fingers through her hair in silence, letting her grieve. "You will cause a flood if you don't calm down, and then we will definitely get in trouble with Miss Ruth," Mike joked, gently wiping tears from her face. "Hope, don't be offended, but I'm sort of glad that it happened, because now we will be together like we were before," he said as he winked at her. Hope missed Mike while she was away, but she did not want to be reunited under these circumstances. This was her last chance to find a family, albeit a foster one. All children in the orphanage clearly understood that preference is given as a rule to young children under 5 years old. Teenagers are the least wanted. Hope was already 11 years old. She was already incredibly lucky to have been fostered a year ago, but her foster mother could not accept her, even though she tried her best to be loved. "Mike, you go. I need to be alone right now," she said quietly to her friend. He nodded understandingly and left. Hope lay down on the bed. There were no more tears. Now she felt only emptiness and indifference to everything. Reflecting on her life, Hope did not understand why some children got everything. Loving, caring parents, brothers and sisters, grandparents, holidays with big family gatherings, and other children got nothing except to live under the government's roof with strangers all around. Hope wondered how someone could give up their child and not think about them again. She didn't know the answer, but she hoped that her mother had a good reason for abandoning her and that they would meet again someday. One thing she knew for sure was that she would never give up her child. She would never want her child to experience what she had. When dinner service was called, Hope stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling. There was a soft knock on the door, and a moment later, Miss Ruth appeared in the doorway. When she saw Hope, she sat down on the edge of the bed and comforted her. "Baby, don't tear your soul out. It's not about you. You know there are people who come here like it's a toy store. First they take one, and then they throw it away when they get tired of it. I know that it's very painful and hurtful for you right now, but life goes on. We need to forgive and move on. There will be many more unpleasant moments in life, and you must be prepared for them," Miss Ruth said, voice trembling as she spoke. Miss Ruth barely held back her tears now. In general, she was an incredibly kind woman who treated all children with all her heart. She didn't have her own, so she gave them all the warmth, feeling sympathy for absolutely everyone. The children were also drawn to her and loved the eternally smiling woman very much. Hope looked at Miss Ruth and suddenly asked, "Miss Ruth, do you know the reason why my mom gave up on me?" "Does it matter, my dear?" Miss Ruth replied warily. "I just want to know. Maybe there is a reason. Maybe something happened that she made her want to give me up. You've been working here all your life. Do you remember how I got here?" Hope looked so optimistic that a shiver ran down Miss Ruth's spine. "Hope, honey, I'm sorry. I don't know the details," she said. She couldn't look Hope in the eyes as she remembered how she personally took baby Hope from her mother's arms, trying to dissuade her. But she did not want to listen to anything. Hope's mother could only say that the baby had ruined her life, but Miss Ruth would never tell Hope the truth. Hope noticed tears rolling from Miss Ruth's eyes. "Miss Ruth, are you crying?" "Don't, please," Hope said and hugged the woman. "How can I not cry? Because my soul aches for each of you," Miss Ruth replied. "But there are so many of us, and you have one soul. Let's both calm down and not cry anymore," Hope suggested. When Hope came downstairs for dinner, she spotted Mike coming toward her, and he whisked her around the room. Life in the orphanage continued for Hope. It was time to say goodbye to Mike, the best friend she ever had. Mike had turned 18, which meant that it was time for him to live an independent life. As expected, he received housing from the state and joined the army. He regularly wrote letters to his true love, Hope. Childhood friendship had gradually developed into a youthful infatuation, so everyone considered them a couple. After serving his contracted time, Mike had not forgotten about Hope. On the contrary, he regularly visited her. Hope anticipated his visits with a joyous heart because she had never been as close to someone as she was to Mike. Shortly before Hope graduated, the headmaster of the orphanage wanted to speak with her. Hope thought that it was about her finding a potential home, but she was mistaken. An unknown man was waiting for her in the office. "Hope, this man came on behalf of your grandmother," the manager, Mrs. Douglas, began carefully. "The woman does not have long left. She is in the hospital and would very much like to see you." Hope had a grandmother? But how was this possible? Hope was confused. "If you agree to go to the hospital with me, you will find out for yourself," the man said. Hope nodded. Miss Ruth accompanied the pair, apprehensive about leaving Hope with an unknown man. Entering the ward, Hope saw an incredibly old woman who had medical tubes and devices connected all over her body. "You wanted to see me?" Hope asked quietly, carefully examining the woman. Are you Hope Mortense? The woman asked. Yes, Hope replied, but she was so confused. Call my lawyer, the woman ordered. Once her lawyer arrived, she continued the conversation. I'm your paternal grandmother. Unfortunately, my husband and son left too soon. Now it's my turn. You're the only one left in our family, so after I leave, I bequeath you everything I have, a big house and a decent bank account. All this will be issued in your name, the woman said as she motioned to her lawyer to present the official signed documents. She turned away from Hope to look out the window. Is that all? Hope wondered aloud. Trust me, it's not that small. Or did you want something else? The old woman said, grinning. You haven't seen me once in your life, and don't even want to ask how I lived, Hope said. I would like to know at least something from my life, Hope said indignantly. Okay, I'll tell you, but after that you'll leave right away. I'm already very tired, the woman said with irritation in her voice. When your mother found out she was expecting a baby, my son was only 22 years old. He wanted to get married, but I forbade him, threatening to deprive him of everything if he did. Your mother dreamed of marrying a rich guy, so when he left her, she decided to abandon you. She only needed you to get a goal. My son moved abroad and got married, but there were no children in that marriage. 5 years ago, he died in an accident with his wife. My husband died almost immediately after, suffering a heart attack. I found you, although it wasn't difficult at all. That's the whole story. Now go away. I sincerely feel sorry for you, Hope said through tears. You don't know what it means to love, because even now you are only worried about your money. After a long pause, Hope said goodbye and left the room. After Hope's graduation, Hope and Mike decided to live together in the same house that Hope had inherited. They decided to donate the money to the orphanage where they both grew up. As time passed, Hope and Mike got married and were looking forward to welcoming their first baby. Hope made lunch and escorted her husband back to work so she could get some fresh air. Suddenly, Hope ran into a strange woman at the gate. Can you tell me if Hope Mortense lives in this house? She asked Hope. She does. It's me. That's my maiden name. What did you want? Hope asked curiously. Looking into the woman's eyes, Hope had to suddenly catch her breath. She knew who was standing in front of her. My daughter! I finally found you! The woman screamed and rushed to hug Hope. Hope could not believe her eyes, but she invited her mother into the house. After pouring the tea into the cups, Hope sat down opposite her mother and asked, looking into her eyes, Why did you abandon me? Her mother replied, You see, daughter, your father left me when he found out that I was expecting a child. His mother insisted on it, and I didn't have anything to feed you. But let's not talk about the bad. We're together now. You know you have a younger brother, and he really wants to see you. Do you mind? Hope's mother asked. Yes, of course, I'll meet him, Hope replied absently. Hope had two thoughts on her mind at that moment. On the one hand, she was glad that her mother had found her, but on the other hand, it all seemed very strange. Hope's mother soon left, promising to come to visit next weekend, but with her brother. In the evening, Hope's husband returned from work, and she told him about the unexpected visit. You dreamed of finding your mom, and now you're not happy about it at all? Mike asked gently. Yes, I have replayed our meeting with her thousands of times in my head, but everything did not happen at all as I thought. She didn't even ask for forgiveness for leaving me, and didn't ask at all how I had been living all this time. The conversations were only about her and my brother, Hope replied sadly. Don't worry, let them come by this weekend. Let's try to find out what she needs and why she actually found you, Mike said. All week, the young woman suffered in anticipation of the unknown. She decided to invite Miss Ruth to dinner because Hope and Mike had continued to maintain a relationship with her over the years. When the weekend came, the doorbell rang, and Hope saw her mother and a young man who resembled Hope. "Meet Nick, your brother." The woman introduced the young man. Nick gave the impression of a modest and shy guy and immediately liked Hope. Glancing at Miss Ruth, who was present at the table, her mother tensed and made a displeased look, which did not go unnoticed. "And what is this woman doing here?" Hope's mother asked, pointing to Miss Ruth. "This woman was like a mother to us, sat with us when we were sick, calmed us down when we were sick, shared the joys with us," Mike quipped. "Excuse me, how can I address you?" he asked. "Megan," Hope's mother hissed. "Here, daughter, your brother will soon be studying near you, so you can see each other often. However, it's so expensive to rent an apartment. I'm afraid I won't be able to help. Maybe you'll take him in? We're not strangers after all," trying to hold on direct eye contact, Megan said, looking at her daughter. "Excuse me, Megan. I was wondering how you got your daughter's address," Miss Ruth asked. "So the newspaper wrote that this house went to an unknown granddaughter of the former owners," Megan said, and stopped. "And what is the age difference between Hope and Nick?" Mike continued his questions. 2 years. Why?" Megan's face turned crimson. Hope watched in silence. "Because of the fact that 2 years after you abandoned Hope, you gave birth again. So you had housing and funds, but you didn't even think to return for your daughter. And I don't have to imagine that you were looking for her. You found out she had received a good inheritance and decided to get something out of it. That's clear. Stop playing games," Mike told her. "And who are you to tell me off?" Megan screamed. "It's her brother. She has to help him. And anyway, if she hadn't been born to me, her life wouldn't have turned out differently," she persisted. Nick took his mother's arm and tried to lead her to the door, but she did not stop pouring insults at Hope. Tears rolled from Hope's eyes, so Miss Ruth hurried her into the bedroom and told her to sit on the bed. "Why is she doing this to me? She doesn't need me at all," she whispered. "Calm down, baby. It will be okay," Miss Ruth reassured her. When Mike finally managed to get the guests out of the house, Miss Ruth was already calling an ambulance. The stress of it all had caused Hope to go into labor. At the hospital, Hope gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. Hope looked into her daughter's face, realized that she would never be able to part with her. Hope cut Megan out of her life. Although she tried to establish contact several times, but Hope maintained a friendly relationship with her brother. Hope and Mike invited Miss Ruth to live with them and help with the baby, which Miss Ruth agreed to and was incredibly happy about. In the end, Hope and Mike became the best parents for their little girl.
Daisy was passionate about sewing another dress on a sewing machine. She loved sewing and making new clothes for people. Her favorite work allowed her to temporarily forget her poor existence, her father's illness, and that the world was unfair to her. Daisy was trying to spend more time at work because she was not happy at home. Her mother had already died, and her father was very ill. But most of all, the girl was frightened and upset by her older brother Harry. He didn't work anywhere, only drank, and waited for Daisy to bring the money. Her sick father could not influence his son, and the girl was too weak to stand up to her older brother. Daisy was afraid to move out of the house because her father would be left unattended. She also feared her brother's revenge. Harry took most of the girl's money, so she couldn't save up. But Daisy wasn't depressed. She worked hard, just like her mother taught her. Chief fashion designer Mr. Atman noted Daisy's diligence and passion for the profession. She was no longer to sew, but to paint new models, offer ideas, and help choose fabrics and accessories. Daisy was proud of her new position at 22. She would very much like to share the joy with her mother. Her mother taught her to sew and instilled a love for modeling and sewing clothes. But her mother died and did not see how intelligent and beautiful her daughter had grown up. Before Daisy climbed the career ladder, she worked as a seamstress with her friend Angela. When Mr. Atmont announced that Daisy would now assist him with his new collection, there was no limit to the girl's happiness. Daisy immediately shared with Angela the glad tidings, but for some reason, her friend did not support her and said, "Mr. Atmont made you his assistant too quickly. I've been working here longer than you. Angela, I'd like to get your job, but it's not up to me." So Daisy started making excuses. Angela relented and asked to see Daisy's sketches for Mr. Atmont. "What beautiful dresses," said Angela. "You have natural talent." Mr. Atmont made the right choice. "Your models look fresh and original." "Well done." Angela looked closely at every sketch of the dress. Daisy was embarrassed by the praise. She was delighted that her friend no longer resented her. The next day, Daisy came to work on her album. She wore a dress that she made herself. It was her favorite dress. It emphasized her beautiful figure, and more importantly, it gave a lovely mood. All night, Daisy drew sketches for Mr. Atmont's collection. Daisy knocked and entered the head designer's office. She saw not only Mr. Atmont, but Angela in the office room. She had a sketchbook in her hand. Daisy saw it and stopped. Angela's drawings were very similar to Daisy's. Her friend just stole her ideas and pretended to be hers. "Look, Daisy, Angela's ideas are so authentic. How will you please me?" Mr. Atmont addressed her. Daisy was very disappointed with her friend's betrayal and could not open her file. She could barely untie the clasps on the cheap cardboard folder. Mr. Atmont picked up the sheets, frowned, and began comparing them with Angela's sketches. "She stole my ideas," Angela screamed. "I didn't expect you to do that." But Daisy couldn't say a word. Not only did Angela steal her ideas, but she accused Daisy of stealing. "No doubt Daisy's drawings are more expressive, but I don't need artistic skills, I need original ideas," said Mr. Atmont. Daisy was silent. "That's terrible, Daisy," said Mr. Atmont. "It's the thieving that angers me the most, especially when people steal ideas." All of Mr. Atmont's image was distressing because he liked Daisy for her hard work. "You can't expect anything good from her," said Angela. "Her family is poor and her brother is a thief." Tears poured out of Daisy's eyes. The girl ran out of the office, not understanding where she was going because of the veil of tears. Daisy couldn't keep working for Mr. Atmont. She was ashamed, though she wasn't the thief. Daisy was on her way home, thinking how she would tell her father and brother that she had lost her job. So cruelly, she thought. Maybe she should have stayed and worked as a seamstress. But no, Daisy couldn't stay because she was wrongly accused of stealing. With every step, Daisy made it harder to come home. Finally, she arrived. The doors were open. It scared Daisy. The girl gently entered the house. In the kitchen, the older brother was sitting and drinking alcohol. "Daisy!" "Hello." "When will you bring the money?" Harry asked. Daisy didn't answer anything and went back to the room where her father used to sit. But her father wasn't there. Daisy went back to the kitchen and asked, "Where's Dad, Harry?" "Oh, our old man must be dead. The doctors took him. He was wheezing a long time. I didn't have time for him," said Harry on the whiskey glass. "The booze won't wait." Daisy's legs hurt. She wanted to hit her brother with hate, but he was much stronger than her. Her brother could have beaten her if she'd just scolded him. "I'm going to my dad's," Daisy said. "Whatever you want, dear sister, but it would have been nice to have some money first for your beloved brother." Daisy ran out of the house. She had little money in her purse, quit her job, and now she was thinking about how to get to the hospital. Daisy stood by the road in despair and looked for passing cars. A car stopped. A young man was sitting in the car. He lowered the window of the vehicle and asked loudly, "Excuse me, am I on the right way to the hospital?" Daisy's heart was racing. "Yes, you're going right." Suddenly, she decided to ask for help and said, "I have to go there, too, urgently. Could you give me a lift?" "Of course, I'd be happy to help," said the lad. "I have very little money," said Daisy. "Don't worry, girl. You show me the way and that'll be enough," said the lad. "My name's Mick." "I'm Daisy," said the girl, and got into the car. The guy turned out to be friendly. He said he would visit his uncle. The guy noticed that Daisy was sorrowful. Mick asked the girl what was wrong with her. Daisy suddenly told him about her friend's betrayal, her dismissal, and her father's illness. You know, Daisy, I had a rough patch too. I was blind once. We looked for reasons but couldn't find any. I gave myself my word that I would one day see again. One day, after a relentless search and endless visits, the doctors gave its result, and I began to see again. Cool. You're a strong man, said Daisy. Thank you. I was making a point, and it wasn't for nothing, because today I figured out why I got my sight back. To see a beautiful girl like you. Daisy was embarrassed by the guy's words and didn't know what to say. What do you dream of? Mick asked. I dream that one day I will create my collection. These will be dresses in which girls and women will bloom like flowers. It's a wonderful dream, said Mick. Believe in yourself. My aunt runs the atelier, of course, not as big as Mr. Atwood's agency. I didn't know, said Daisy. She felt ashamed for telling a guy her problems she didn't know, and grateful for the sympathy at the same time. When the young people got out of the car, Mick gave Daisy a card with her aunt's contacts and urged her to call. Their paths diverged. Daisy needed to find her father. She saw how bad he looked when she entered her father's room. The old man did not immediately hear that Daisy had come in. The girl gently touched her father's hand, and her father opened his eyes. Hello, Daisy. Hello, my flower, said her father. His voice was feeble. Dad, how are you feeling? Daisy asked. I'm sick and keeping you from your work. Daisy, you must go to work. Daisy could not say that she had quit. She knew the truth could have killed her father. She could not have disturbed him at that time. Dad, you'll be fine, said Daisy. The doctor's conversation was disappointing. Father needed expensive treatment, and she had no money. Daisy was very sorry for letting her older brother take the money. They'd have gotten a lot of money if it weren't for Harry. But alas, the family did not have any savings. Daisy promised the doctor that she would bring the necessary amount, although she did not know how she would do it. Daisy walked home on foot because she had no money for a taxi. She had nowhere to go. Despite her sad mood, Daisy noticed the beauty of nature. She was mentally trying to dress on women who walked past her. Did Daisy think about her mom? What would she say to her? Would she understand if Daisy gave up her dreams? The girl decided to go to Mick's aunt's studio. The next day, Daisy came to Mr. Morris's studio. Being terrified at first, she stepped into the building. At Morrison's atelier, things were not the same as at Atmund's. Instead of fuss and creative colors, there was an atmosphere of comfort and tranquility. No one was shouting at the seamstress or throwing sketches, as Mr. Atmund sometimes did. This should be Mr. Morrison, the girl understood. Hello, Daisy said. I was told I came to see you. If you had a job as a seamstress, I have some experience. Hello, said Mrs. Morrison. We have a job. Where did you work before? At Mr. Atmund's, said Daisy. Oh, so you're the Daisy fashion designer who stole other people's ideas, said the owner. All the employees of the shop immediately looked at Daisy with curiosity. Mr. Atmund strongly advised me not to hire you, continued Mrs. Morrison. Daisy's heart seemed to stop. She wanted to run away, but her feet were stuck to the floor. She thought she was ashamed. She was bitter that Mr. Atmund made sure she didn't have a job. How could she prove it? Mr. Atmund knows more about fabrics than humans. Can a lovely lady steal ideas? That's ridiculous. Let Mr. Atmund give recommendations to whoever he wants, but I'll hire you. Daisy thought for a moment she heard wrong. Mrs. Morrison was hiring her? Daisy's joy was endless, and she waited to breathe because she was believed. I'll take anything, said Daisy. Tears of gratitude made themselves felt. Thank you. You'll thank me later, said Mrs. Morrison, while I give you some simple assignments, because I need to see you in action. Daisy took up her job with enthusiasm. She did her favorite thing again. Even when performing simple orders, she sometimes allowed herself to advise on selecting fabric and how to change the cut so that the dress or suit fit better. Mrs. Morrison was surprisingly receptive to information, not arguing. The payment for her father's treatment was near, and she had not yet earned any money. Daisy went to the bank but was turned down. She didn't dare ask for a loan, and who would she ask? By the end of the week, Mrs. Morrison called Daisy. "Daisy, look, this is my best client. She urgently needs a dress for her nephew's christening. I decided to give you the order, okay?" "Of course, I'll do my best," said Daisy. It was the first full-scale order at that studio. Daisy tried her best, and the dress turned out fantastic. It was as strict as possible, but it did not hide the woman's beauty. The client was so pleased that she paid generously for the order and added a few tips. Mrs. Morrison gave all the money to Daisy, saying, "Daisy, you've earned that money. I'm proud of you and myself for not playing along with Mr. Atmont." Daisy was happy because she now had the money to pay for some of her father's treatment. She was afraid to go home with her money because her older brother was there and could have taken the cash. Daisy went straight to the hospital after work. There she met Mick by chance. "What a pleasure to see you again, Daisy," said the lad. "Nice to see you too," said Daisy. "Thank you." "Why?" Mick was surprised. "You gave me Mrs. Morrison's card, and now I work for her," said Daisy. "Oh, so you're the intelligent, beautiful, extraordinarily talented girl my aunt tells me about every day." Daisy blushed. She didn't know Mrs. Morrison spoke so highly of her. "Well, I'm happy you're working for my aunt, but don't forget one thing," said Mick. "What?" Daisy asked. "Don't forget your dream of a collection. I'd like to see it," said the lad. Daisy felt that she had forgotten her dream. Daisy worked hard. Her father was on the mend. As time passed, Daisy suggested to Mrs. Morrison that she create her collection of dresses. The girl showed sketches that greatly inspired the owner of the studio. In a short time, the Violet Group was created and created a furor in the fashion world. Daisy not only entered the fashion world, but also proved to everyone that she did not steal ideas. Time puts everything in its place. Applying the standard sentence, "born from a humble background," is an understatement in the case of Toby, as he grew up from the specks of dirt in the gutter. The latter sentence describes better the kind of rough childhood he had. Toby, unlike other kids, wore the adulthood mantle at his tender age, as he was more empathetic and intelligent than brilliant. Although his parents were stinking poor, many times he had to skip classes to survive, as he engaged in a loud number of menial jobs. Often, these job sessions clashed with school hours, leaving him no choice but to skip school activities, since the school wasn't paying him, but rather taking from the little he was making, as there was always a new book or reading materials to buy. Toby is the first male and the third child with two younger siblings who are boys. In other words, he is the third among 5 children of his parents, and the first son. Do you know what this formation implies? He has to commit more as the first son, because he has a great responsibility on his shoulders. He might have decided to care less, since he was just a teenager. Still, due to Toby's personality, he sees himself as more than his age, as he believes his position in his family makes him the second man after his father. Hence, he's saddled with the duty of providing for their basic needs, just like his father. He feels terrible when his elder sisters and younger brothers, who are always impatient, lament their parents' financial incapability and instability. He was the only one amongst them who understood the parents and believed that all fingers, although rooted in a particular hand, are not equal. The other siblings blame their parents at every opportunity they get for not being rich and financially committed like their mates. On several occasions, they had compared their father with the neighbor in the next house, Mr. Tadden, a business owner with his firm. and was assured to be living just as fine as he had a fleet of luxurious cars in his compound. It is wrong to play the compare and contrast game on Daddy. He's not lazy, and he's trying his best, was Toby's frequent defense line, but they often attacked his statement by uniformly echoing his trying is never enough. The humiliation of his father from the children, Toby's siblings, and several other reasons, coupled together, made Toby engage in petty jobs that made him pay wages, and the majority of his earnings he spends on his siblings, which went on for years. Toby's love for tech and programming made him decide to learn the skill professionally, immediately after high school. He had gathered some funds to sign up. He was prepared. He saved up for 4 years from his street jobs and often kept the money in a secret hole known to him only. This weird method was applied after he was taught an unforgettable lesson. Do you care to know what happens before the hole saving procedure? Formerly, he used to keep his money carelessly. Maybe it was not careless, but keeping his money in a purse hanging around somewhere in his room was a bad idea in a house where his devouring siblings were living too. They often take his money, and no one ever takes responsibility for the theft. He decided to change his bank and started keeping his money in the ceiling. The outcome wasn't successful too, because this time, the money wasn't stolen, but eaten by rats. These previous experiences made him dig a secret hole, which turned out productive, as his hungry siblings never found out about the spot, and even the rats couldn't prevail. He overcame his adversaries. Toby later married Maria. They had 3 kids together and were all boys. He was living a mediocre life, but that's not what he envisioned. He wanted more from life as he didn't want to endure his father's humiliation. On a fateful day, he concluded to move to the city in search of greener pastures, having convinced his wife that for them to live the lives they dream about and to give their kids the best care, he had to go to the city to further his programming learning. The wife, naturally, disagreed, but since it was for a better life, she couldn't insist further. Toby promised to visit home at least once a month to see the wife and the kids, as they were still very young. The eldest was just 5 years old, the other 3, while the youngest was around a year senior. The city was in a different state entirely, but Toby kept to his words and visited just as they had agreed. He needed to raise some capital to build his own company when he was done learning. He had to work extra hours in the city. At some point, he became a freelancer for top-notch companies, earning well. He was able to raise something tangible. He developed and launched his first software. Things began to change positively, as he demanded the relocation of his wife and kids. After a few years, his company has kept a sound track and record. It topped as the best programming company in the city, attracting wealthy angel investors. This made Toby's company well known, with several branches across the country. In no time, Toby had become very wealthy and lived the life he had wished for with his wife. He overcame his greatest fear, as he gave his children all the care and attention he didn't enjoy as a kid. He sent them to the best school in the city, paid their allowances before due time, and practically did everything a father was supposed to do for his kids. When it was time for them to start working, he established them in their individual choices of a business. He eventually became a billionaire after his company expanded to the entire continent and broke out of it. He now has a company in 53 countries. Toby became a well-respected man in his country, and his biographies were taught in schools to motivate kids that there is no limit to what they can achieve, irrespective of where they are coming from, as Toby is a living testimony. Even though Toby is successful in his niche, he never forced his business on any kids. He didn't impose his choice on them, but instead respected their decisions and gave them his full support. After about 30 years of recognition, Toby's boys had grown up and had established themselves with financial and psychological support from their father. The eldest son was an auto dealer, the second son was into real estate, and the youngest ran a successful restaurant. Everything was smooth until the unexpected happened. Toby was diagnosed with cancer and discovered he had just a few months to live. He felt terrible for himself, but worried more about his legacy when he was gone, his company. He has not had time to checkmate the boys as they grew up in wealth. Reminiscing on his memories as a lad, he concluded that his father's humiliation was purposefully because he was poor. The thought torments him by the day, and each time he thinks, a question pops up in his head. If his sons were born as poor, would they still regard and respect him, or humiliate him as his siblings did to his father? He decided to test the kids before he died. He didn't tell them about his newly discovered health situation, not even his wife. He decided to run a setback test on the boys to know if they would still love him regardless. He openly declared his company was going bankrupt due to some money he had borrowed to boost his company some years back, of which the interest had grown massively beyond his ability, so that he would be losing the company to debt. He explained to his sons that he had also mortgaged his house and was to lose his homes too. He told them he had to sell his cars to cover the remaining debt. Hence, he had no property or possessions left. He carried his board members along that all was a stunt, and he was doing it to get some fundamental rights. But they should cooperate with him and keep the truth away from the public. When it's time to unwrap the truth, he would do just that. It was challenging to convince the investors, as they complained that such a prank was deadly and would affect their heritage. But afterwards, they agreed to cooperate as long as he promised them that the stunt wouldn't last too long. His sons didn't believe in hearing it at press stations until they confronted their father and he confirmed it as accurate. They were disappointed their father didn't tell them about it, and they had to find out most embarrassingly. They left their father in anger. After a week, Toby went viral as people had different things to say about the shocking news. Some emphasized with him for his massive loss, while others abused him for taking such a stupid step, as they thought he was an intelligent businessman. He sooner appeared in his sons' respective companies, starting with the eldest, to know what they still felt about him, to see if they were worthy of managing his wealth when he eventually died. He appeared like a retard searching for a job in their distinct companies, as he claimed he was now homeless. They sent him away, as they claimed he didn't involve them when he got the exorbitant loan, and rarely included him in his business when it was ranking. Thus, he shouldn't bother them, as, unlike him, they are still respectable people. The youngest son, however, was disappointed that his father didn't include them earlier until he lost all, forgave him and listened to him. He offered him a soothing job for an older man, and if he needed to learn a new skill, he would pay for the course and grant him the capital to start over once he was done learning. He will also provide him with a new house and car to drive around. He ordered that his staff serve him honorably, daily, and offer him whatever he asked for. He later took him home to freshen him up and change his clothes, as he looked so unkempt and rough. On the second day, Toby summoned his 3 sons for a family meeting. The eldest and second son refused to attend, as they were still cross at him. They claimed to be busy, but they gave a second thought to hearing the venue. The meeting was held in Toby's private guest house, his most luxurious house. The sons were surprised because that was one of the houses he claimed to have lost. Toby started by revealing his newly detected ailment. Then he told them he didn't lose any of his property, as he had only put them on a test to know whom amongst them genuinely cares about him and is capable of preserving his legacy when he's gone. Still, only their little brother had proven to be the qualified one by passing his little test. For that reason, even though he has forgiven the other 2, as they will remain his sons, 80% of his property shall be willed to their little brother, including his great company. In comparison, the brothers will share the remaining 20%. The brothers sobbed bitterly and asked for their father's forgiveness. After 2 weeks, Toby passed away, and his lawyer to his sons allocated his property as he demanded. The moral lesson of this story is that there's no limit to what you can attain and where you can reach, regardless of your past account or background. However, while money is good, we shouldn't love people just for their money, no matter who they are to us. A relationship is unhealthy if it's based just on money. Similarly, respect shouldn't be quantified by how much wealth someone amasses or possesses. Furthermore, it's not ideal for forsaking a friend or family during troubles or setbacks. No condition is permanent, they say, good or bad, because life is full of ups and downs. When a family or friend falls, It's our utmost responsibility to be the shoulder they can lean on by helping in whatever way we can. In some situations, money might not be the solution. They could all need words of encouragement or physical presence to get back on their feet. So when someone falls, don't make fun of their situation or detach. Instead, help them rise again. That's what a family or a friend should be about. Conclusively, getting crossed at someone for not doing the needful at the right time is okay, like in the case of Toby. He didn't carry his family along on time. But then your anger shouldn't overshadow the bond and relationship you have built with someone over the years. Learn to forgive soon, just like the youngest child did. Don't hold up to someone's flaws for long, as no man is perfect. Be the reason why someone who is sad smiles again. Be the reason why someone who has fallen rises again. Be more of a strength than a weakness.